I'm still processing everything that happened 3 weeks ago, and I honestly don't know where to start. My whole life feels like it's been built on lies, and I'm questioning everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. I guess I need to get this all out somewhere. And maybe some of you can help me figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do now. I'm 26, and I've been with my boyfriend Barry for over 8 years. We met in college when I was 18, and it was one of those instant connection things. We started dating pretty much immediately, and it's been the most stable, loving relationship I've ever had. Barry became part of my family really quickly. My parents adored him, which I always thought was sweet, but looking back now makes me physically sick. Growing up, I always felt a little different from my parents. Not in any dramatic way, just small things. I'm naturally athletic and tall, while both my parents are on the shorter side and pretty sedentary. I have dark hair and eyes, while they're both blonde with blue eyes. My mom always said I got my looks from my grandmother on my dad's side, who I never met because she died before I was born. I never questioned it because why would I? These were my parents, the people who raised me and loved me. When I was 22, those DNA ancestry kits became really popular, and I thought it would be fun to do one. I was curious about our family history, especially since my parents were always pretty vague about our extended family. When I told my parents I wanted to do the test, they seemed nervous but said it was fine. A few weeks later, the results came back showing that I was 100% genetically related to both of them, which seems to put their minds at ease. On the other hand, Barry and I got more serious over the years. We moved in together after college, and about 2 years ago, we started talking seriously about marriage. We both wanted the same things: a house in the suburbs, kids, the whole traditional family setup. Barry is from a smaller family than mine. His parents died in a car accident when he was 16, and he was raised by his Aunt Sarah, who lives about 3 hours away from us. 3 weeks ago, Barry planned this elaborate proposal at my family's annual summer barbecue. My parents host this big gathering every year with extended family, neighbors, close friends. It's always been one of my favorite traditions. Barry had been acting nervous all week, and I suspected something was up when he insisted we arrive early to help with setup. The barbecue was going perfectly. The weather was beautiful. Everyone was having a great time, and Barry seemed to be getting more nervous as the day went on. Around evening, when most of the guests were gathered in the backyard, Barry suddenly got down on one knee right in front of everyone. I was so shocked and happy that I didn't even hear most of what he said. But I remember everyone. I was so shocked and happy that I didn't even hear most of what he said. But I remember him talking about how much he loved me, how he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. Just as I was about to say yes, I noticed my parents looked absolutely horrified. Not surprised or emotional in a good way, but genuinely terrified. My mom had gone completely pale. My dad was staring at Barry with an expression I'd never seen before. And before I could even respond to Barry's proposal, my mom suddenly shouted, "Stop!" so loudly that everyone went quiet. What happened next was the most surreal and devastating moment of my life. My mom started crying and saying, "We have to tell them! We have to tell them now!" over and over. My dad was trying to calm her down, but she was having what seemed like a panic attack. All our guests were staring, and Barry was still on one knee, looking confused and concerned. My dad finally helped my mom inside, and after a few awkward minutes, people started leaving. Barry and I followed my parents into the house, where my mom was sitting at the kitchen table sobbing, and that's when my dad told us the truth. And I honestly still can't believe it's real. I'm adopted. I've been adopted since I was 3 months old. My biological parents were my dad's cousin and his wife. They died in a house fire when I was a baby, and my parents took me in, but here's the part that makes me want to throw up. Barry is my biological cousin. His Aunt Sarah, who raised him, is actually my biological mother's sister. My parents knew this from the very first day I brought Barry home 8 years ago, but they never said anything because they thought we'd break up eventually. The DNA test results I got 4 years ago were completely fake. My parents had submitted their own DNA samples instead of mine, and somehow manipulated the results to show that I was their biological child. I still don't understand exactly how they managed to do this, but apparently my dad has a friend who works at a lab who helped them. Barry and I are first cousins. We share grandparents. We've been in love for 8 years, living together, planning a future, and we're blood relatives. The worst part is that everyone in my family knew, except for us. My aunts, uncles, and even some family friends knew the truth about my adoption and about Barry's real relationship to me. They all just watched us fall in love and said nothing. After my parents finished explaining everything, Barry and I just sat there in complete shock. We didn't know what to say to each other or how to even process what we'd just learned. Barry's Aunt Sarah apparently found out about our relationship years ago when Barry mentioned my last name, but she assumed my parents would tell us the truth. She's been waiting for them to say something this whole time. My entire identity has been a lie. I don't know anything about my real parents or my actual family history. I don't know what genetic conditions might run in my family or what my ethnic background really is. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Barry's been staying at a friend's place since that day. We've texted a few times, but we haven't really talked about what this means for our relationship. I think we're both too overwhelmed to have that conversation yet. Part of me still loves him exactly the same way I did before I found out, which makes me feel guilty and confused. Another part of me feels like our entire relationship is ruined by this information. I'm also furious with my parents and everyone else who knew the truth. They watched me plan a life with someone they knew was my cousin and said nothing. They let me get a fake DNA test and live with false information about my own identity for years. I understand that they probably thought they were protecting me, but their deception has caused so much more damage than the truth would have. I've been staying with my best friend since the barbecue because I can't stand to be in the same house as my parents right now. They keep calling and texting, trying to explain their reasoning, asking me to come home so we can talk. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. I keep thinking about all the times over the years when my parents seemed uncomfortable, when Barry and I talked about getting married and having kids. I remember my mom making weird comments about how we should make sure we're really compatible before making any big commitments. I thought she was just being an overprotective parent, but now I realize she was probably trying to hint at the truth without actually telling me. But I can't get past the deception and the feeling that our relationship was built on a lie, even though we didn't know it was a lie. I also can't stop thinking about how our families just watched this happen for 8 years. Every family gathering, every holiday, every time Barry and I talked about our future, they all knew something we didn't. I'm supposed to start graduate school in the fall, and I don't know if I can handle that on top of everything else that's happening. I had planned to study genetics, which now feels like some kind of cosmic joke. I've been thinking about deferring for a year while I figure out my life, but I also don't want this situation to derail my career plans. Am I crazy for still having feelings for Barry? Are my parents unforgivable for lying to me for so long? Should I try to have a relationship with my biological extended family now that I know the truth? I honestly don't know how to move forward from here, and I feel completely lost. Update 1. I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Reading all your perspectives has been really helpful, even though I'm still feeling pretty overwhelmed by everything. A lot has happened in the past few days, and I thought I should update you all. First, I finally talked to Barry properly. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop near our apartment, and had a long conversation about everything. It was incredibly difficult, but we both knew we needed to address what this revelation means for our relationship. Barry has been doing his own research and soul searching since finding out. He told me that his first instinct was the same as mine, that our relationship feels tainted by this information, even though we didn't know we were related when we fell in love. But he also said that his feelings for me haven't changed, and he's struggling with the same guilt I am about that. We talked about the legal and social aspects of cousin relationships. It is legal in our state, and while it's not exactly common, it's not unheard of either. Barry pointed out we didn't grow up together as a family, so we don't have the typical psychological barriers that exist between relatives who were raised as siblings or cousins. The conversation was emotional and confusing. We both admitted that we still love each other, but we also both feel like we need time to process this information before making any decisions about our future. We decided to continue living separately for now while we figure things out. Barry is going to stay with his friend for another few weeks, and I'm going to keep staying with my best friend. I also finally had a conversation with my parents. I went back to the house when I knew they'd both be home, and we sat down in the living room where I've had so many important conversations over the years. It was strange being back there knowing what I know now. My parents were both clearly devastated by how everything had played out. My mom has barely been eating or sleeping since the barbecue, and my dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. They apologized repeatedly and tried to explain their reasoning for keeping the truth from me. According to them, when they first took me in as a baby, they made the decision to raise me as their biological child because they thought it would be easier for me. They said that in the 1990s there was still some stigma around adoption, and they wanted to protect me from having to deal with questions or feeling different from other kids. When I got older and started dating Barry, they recognized his last name and realized who he was almost immediately. They said they kept waiting for our relationship to run its course naturally, especially since we were so young when we got together. They never imagined we'd stay together for 8 years and get serious enough to consider marriage. My mom broke down when she talked about the DNA test. She said they panicked when I wanted to do it and didn't know what else to do. My dad's friend, who works at the lab, apparently helped them submit false samples, and they've been living with the guilt of that deception ever since. They kept insisting that they were trying to protect me, but they acknowledge now that their approach caused much more harm than good. My dad said that they should have told me the truth about my adoption from the beginning, and they definitely should have spoken up when they realized who Barry was. I'm still angry with them, but I can also see how they got trapped in their own lies over the years. Each time they had an opportunity to tell the truth, it probably felt harder because they'd already been lying for so long. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it helps me understand their mindset a little better. My parents also gave me more information about my biological family. My biological father was my dad's very distant cousin, Michael, and my biological mother was named Lisa. They died in a house fire caused by faulty wiring when I was 3 months old. Apparently Lisa and Barry's aunt Sarah were very close sisters, which explains why Barry and I have some similar mannerisms and interests that we always attributed to spending so much time together. I have other biological relatives I've never met, including grandparents who are still alive. My parents said that Michael's family knows about me and have always been curious about how I was doing. But they respected my parents' wishes to keep my adoption private. Now that the truth is out, my biological grandparents would like to meet me if I'm open to it. This is another overwhelming aspect of the situation. I've gone from thinking I had a small family to learning that I have a whole other family I've never known about. I don't know how to process the idea of meeting these people or what kind of relationship I might want to have with them. I've also been thinking a lot about Barry's Aunt Sarah and her role in all of this. While I understand why she didn't want to interfere, I also feel like she could have done something to prevent this situation. Barry has talked to her several times since everything came out. And apparently she's been carrying a lot of guilt about not speaking up sooner. The practical aspects of my life are still a mess. Barry and I need to figure out our living situation, our shared finances, and all the other logistical things we've built together over the years. Even if we decide to stay together, we'll probably need to take a step back and rebuild our relationship with this new information. If we decide to break up, untangling our lives is going to be incredibly complicated and painful. I've been seeing a therapist to help me process everything, which has been helpful. She's been working with me on separating my feelings about the deception from my feelings about Barry, and helping me think through what I actually want for my future rather than just reacting to the shock of recent events. I've also been doing more research about cousin relationships, talking to people online who are in similar situations. It's been somewhat comforting to learn that there are other people who face similar challenges, even if the circumstances were different. One thing that's become clear to me is that I need to make decisions based on what I want for my life moving forward, not based on anger about the past or what other people think is appropriate. The fact that Barry and I are cousins is something we'll have to live with, regardless of whether we stay together, but that doesn't necessarily mean our relationship is wrong or doomed. I'm planning to meet with my biological grandparents next week. Barry's going to come with me for emotional support, which feels right, even though our own relationship is still uncertain. We've been each other's primary support system for 8 years. And that doesn't have to change immediately just because we learned we're related. I still don't know what I want for the future, but I'm starting to feel like maybe I don't have to make all these decisions right away. I can take time to process everything and figure out what feels right for me rather than rushing into any major changes because of the shock of learning the truth. Update 2. I'm writing this update from my biological grandparents' house. And I honestly don't know how to process everything that's happened in the past few days. Meeting my biological family has been incredible and overwhelming, but it's also revealed some information that changes everything I thought I knew about my situation. Barry came with me to meet my biological grandparents, Helen and Robert, last Tuesday. The meeting was emotional and beautiful. They live about 2 hours from our city in a small town I'd never visited before. When we pulled up to their house, Helen was waiting on the front porch and she started crying the moment she saw me. The resemblance between us was immediately obvious. I have Helen's nose and Robert's eyes, and I move my hands the same way Helen does when I talk. It was surreal seeing these genetic traits that I'd never understood before because I didn't know where they came from. Helen and Robert welcomed both Barry and me warmly. They'd been hoping to meet me for years, but respected my adoptive parents' wishes to keep my adoption private. They showed me photo albums full of pictures of my biological parents, and I finally got to see where I came from. My biological father, Michael, looked almost exactly like my dad's side of the family, which explains why my adoptive parents' story about me getting my looks from that side seemed plausible. But here's where things get complicated in a way I never expected. While we were looking through family photos and talking about family history, Helen mentioned something casually that made my stomach drop. She said she was so glad that Barry and I had found each other because Lisa, my biological mother, had always hoped her children would stay connected to Sarah's family. When I asked what she meant by children, Helen looked confused, and that's when I learned that I have a biological sister named Emma who's 2 years older than me. Emma was at her father's sister's house the night of the fire, which is why she survived when our parents didn't. Harry and I just stared at each other when Helen told us this. Emma was raised by our biological father's sister and her husband in another state. Helen said that Emma knows about me and has always wanted to meet me, but like everyone else, she was respecting my adoptive parents' decision to keep my adoption private. This revelation completely changes my understanding of my biological family and also adds another layer of complexity to my relationship with Barry. I have a sister I've never met. She's been living her whole life knowing she has a sibling who was raised separately. Helen gave me Emma's contact information and I called her that evening from Helen and Robert's guest room. The conversation was incredible and emotional. Emma said she thought about me every day for 26 years and has always hoped we'd be able to connect someday. She's married with 2 young kids and lives in Oregon, where she works as a nurse. Emma also told me something that completely shocked me. She said that our biological parents, Michael and Lisa, were not actually first cousins like my adoptive parents told me. Michael and my adoptive father were second cousins, which makes Barry and me second cousins, not first cousins. When I confronted my adoptive parents about this over the phone, they admitted they'd been confused about the exact family relationships and had assumed Barry and I were more closely related than we actually are. They said they knew Michael was some kind of cousin, but they didn't understand the distinction between first and second cousins. Second cousins share great-grandparents instead of grandparents, which means the genetic relationship between Barry and me is much more distant than I thought. The risk for genetic issues in children is barely higher than for unrelated couples. And second cousin relationships are legal everywhere in the United States. In fact, most people don't even consider second cousins to be close relatives. This information has completely changed how I feel about my relationship with Barry. While I was struggling with the idea of being with my first cousin, being second cousins feels entirely different. It's still a family connection, but it's distant enough that it doesn't feel inappropriate or problematic. Barry and I had a long conversation about this new information, and we both feel like a huge weight has been lifted. We still need to work through the emotional impact of learning about our biological relationship and dealing with all the deception from our families, but the relationship itself no longer feels wrong or concerning. We've decided that we want to try to rebuild our relationship with this new information. We're going to continue living separately for a little while longer while we work through everything with our therapists, but we both want to move forward together. I'm also incredibly excited about connecting with Emma and learning more about my biological family. Emma is planning to visit next month with her family, and I can't wait to meet my nephews and spend time with the sister I never knew I had. Helen and Robert have been amazing. They've told me so much about my biological parents and shared stories that help me understand where some of my personality traits and interests come from. It's been healing to learn about my genetic heritage and to finally have answers to questions I didn't even know I had. I'm still working through my relationship with my adoptive parents. I understand better now why they were confused about the family relationships, but I'm still hurt by all the years of deception. We're going to start family therapy together next week to work through everything. One unexpected positive outcome of all of this is that Barry has also connected more deeply with his biological family history. Through my grandparents, he's learned more about his mother's side of the family and has gotten to see photos and hear stories about relatives he never knew about. I feel like my life has completely changed in the past few weeks, but in mostly positive ways. Yes, learning about the deception was traumatic, and yes, Having to question my relationship with Barry was incredibly difficult, but I've also gained a sister, grandparents, and a much clearer understanding of where I come from. I'm planning to defer graduate school for a year like I was considering, but now it's not because I'm overwhelmed by crisis. Instead, I want to take time to travel and visit Emma, to build relationships with my biological family, and to rebuild my relationship with Barry on this new foundation. Update 3. I'm writing this final update because something happened yesterday that I think puts a perfect bow on this whole crazy situation, and I wanted to share it with everyone who's been following my story. Emma came to visit earlier than planned. She was supposed to come next month, but she said she couldn't wait any longer to meet me. So she flew out with her 2 kids for a long weekend. The moment I saw her at the airport, I started crying. We looked so much alike that several people asked if we were twins. Spending time with Emma has been incredible. We have so many similar mannerisms and interests that clearly come from our shared genetics. We both unconsciously organize things the same way. We both get excited about the same types of movies. And we even discovered we both have the same weird habit of eating cereal for dinner when we're stressed. Emma brought photo albums and home videos that my biological father's sister had saved over the years. Seeing videos of our parents together was emotional and healing. I finally got to see what they were like as people, not just the tragic story of how they died. Barry and I finally had a proper talk on how to go ahead with us. He brought up what we'd both been thinking but hadn't said out loud. He told me that he'd been carrying the engagement ring around with him for the past few weeks, but every time he thought about proposing again, something just didn't feel right anymore. I was relieved when he said that because I'd been feeling the same way. While the logical part of my brain understood that second cousins getting married isn't really that unusual, emotionally I couldn't get past the weirdness of it all. Knowing that we share great-grandparents, and seeing the family resemblances when I met Helen and Robert, learning about Emma and realizing we're all part of this connected family tree, just made our romantic relationship feel strange in a way I couldn't shake. We had one of the most difficult conversations of our relationship. We both admitted that while we still love each other deeply, something fundamental had changed when we learned the truth about our biological connection. It wasn't about the legality or even the social acceptance. It was about how we felt about ourselves as a couple. Barry said something that really summed it up perfectly. He said that every time he looked at me now, part of his brain saw me as family first and girlfriend second. And that felt weird to him. I told him I was experiencing the same thing, especially after meeting my biological grandparents and seeing how much I looked like them. We talked for hours about whether these feelings might fade over time, but we both realized we didn't want to spend months or years trying to get past something that might always feel uncomfortable to us. 8 years is a long time to be with someone, and ending our romantic relationship was one of the hardest decisions either of us had ever made. But it felt like the right thing to do. Looking back on everything that's happened over the past few months, I'm still processing it all. I went from thinking I was about to get engaged to the love of my life, to discovering that my entire identity was based on lies, to learning I had a whole biological family I'd never met, to ultimately realizing that some truths change everything even when they shouldn't technically matter. The situation was traumatic and difficult, and I can't say I'm grateful for how it all played out because losing Barry as a romantic partner has been incredibly painful. We built a life together for 8 years. And even though ending our relationship was the right decision for both of us, it still feels like a huge loss. But I have gained so much too. I have a sister now and grandparents and a much richer understanding of my family history and where I come from. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was and that I can make difficult decisions even when they hurt. I know some people might think Barry and I were being overly cautious since second cousin relationships are legal and relatively common, but we had to do what felt right for us emotionally, not just what was technically acceptable. The whole experience taught me that sometimes there's no clear right or wrong answer. You just have to trust your instincts about what you can live with. The deception from my adoptive parents was wrong and it caused a lot of unnecessary pain and confusion. I'm still working through my feelings about that in therapy, but I also understand that they were trying to protect me in their own misguided way. And I don't want to lose them too after losing Barry. Sometimes life throws you situations that don't have clean, happy endings. Barry and I both lost something important when we decided not to get married, but we also both chose authenticity and emotional honesty over trying to force something that didn't feel right anymore. I have to believe that was the right choice even when it doesn't feel good. I don't know what the future holds for me romantically, and honestly, I'm not ready to think about that yet. Right now, I'm focused on building relationships with my biological family, finishing my education, and figuring out who I am as an individual rather than as half of a couple. Maybe someday Barry and I will be able to be friends or family in some capacity. But for now, we both need space to heal and move forward separately. It's messy and sad and complicated, but it's also real. And after months of living with lies and deception, real feels like the most important thing, even when it hurts. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.